This is Filmmasters. On this episode, we are going to be repairing this old photo. I had a client come through to me requesting the image to be fixed, and this is the end result. So I'm going to show you how I cleaned up this photo and turned it into something closer to this. So first of all, we're going to get into the color correction. We're going to correct the photo. As you can see, a lot of the pigmentation has come out of the photo over time. Now, this photo was taken in the early 90s, so late 80s, early 90s. So obviously there's a bit of age to the photo and it's gone a red color. So a lot of photos, especially the Kodak film that was used in the days and the inks, over time seem to become red. And what we're going to do is we're going to tackle that. I'm going to change that, show you how to fix it. And so you can start bringing back some of your old family photos, or if you're doing this as a side business, this is another option in order to correct photos. Now I'm in Adobe's Photoshop CC. Now, if you're using an earlier version, that is okay. The functions that we're going to be doing is very similar, so don't stress about that. So first of all, what I do is when I look at the photo, I scan it, and I scan it at 600 dpi. So for example, if I hit 100% up here, you'll see how close or how large the image is. So I can get in there and have a look at the textures. Now, first of all, we can see that there's some cracking that's going on. Now, that's another thing that's happening. The cracking happens with the ink over time, and you start to get it to shrink and it pulls away. And also, this was stuck in a photo, so parts of the photo is still stuck on the glass on the original. So we're going to get in there and correct it. This client's name is Bill, so we'll call him Bill from now on when I'm talking about this photo. And with Bill's eyes, Bill's eyes are blue. And I also found out that when he had the photo taken, he was slightly sunburned. He's a bit of a farmer. He likes to stay out in the sun. So there's going to be some pigmentation that we're going to try and keep around, obviously, his cheeks and his nose and his lips, as well as trying to find some other details, as well as another thing, I'm going to show you how I correct the little cracks in the actual image itself. So the very first thing that I do is I come up and I'll crop the image. So this is obviously A4 in size. It's not an A4 image. So I'm going to bring it straight in there. I'm going to keep some of the colors there because it tells me what color his t-shirt is. Good thing is, obviously, it was in a frame for a period of time, and some of the detail or colors were saved because they were out of the light and hidden underneath the frame. So we can see that his t-shirt, for example, is a bluey color. Now, if, for example, I didn't have that with me, I would have assumed that his shirt is white, but it's not. So sometimes you have to use some creative, I guess, correction when it comes to photos, especially if you don't have that type of bit of detail there, but it's almost like an investigation. What is it? And trying to represent the image as close to the original as possible. Now, let me show you something. Sometimes people go up to image and go auto color correct, and that's what's going to happen here. So it's not going to work. So let's get straight into the image now. So the very first thing, let's go up to image adjustments. I'm going to come down to curves, and I'm going to come down to the channel and select red, because red is the predominant color that we want to remove. And as you can see down here, you'll see that the red is all flat and then it peaks up a little bit past halfway. So I'm going to grab this slider. I'm going to slowly start to move it. Now your image may be different. And as you can see, I'm starting to remove the red and starting to bring the original colors back. That's still a little bit washed out. That's okay. I'm going to come in here and clip the white, bring back a little bit more of the red into the image. So that's the adjustment I've made so far. I can come in here and make some finer adjustments as well. And I might just... What I want to do with this image is actually try and remove as much of the red as you can see in the background, leaving his face. It's a bit pink, but that's okay. We'll adjust that soon. Let's select OK. That's the very first step for this image. Now that we've done that, I'm going to duplicate. So Control J will duplicate. Otherwise, you can go up to Edit, Copy, Edit, Paste. You can do that in order to make another selection. So Control J is a hot code or a shortcut key off the keyboard. Hold the Control down, hit J, as long as that's selected, and it will duplicate the layer for you. The reason I do that is because I want the master that I won't touch. As you can see, it's got a lock in there, and we're going to leave it as is, and all our work now is going to be done here. So I'm going to call this one here, rename it to master, because that is my master copy. I don't want to change it anymore. Let's put a lock on there, lock that layer in, and this will be our main image that we're working on. And if we make an error, we can go back to the original and make a copy from it and move on. So that's always a good thing to do. Let's start now. One thing we're going to do is zoom in, and we're going to have a look. We're going to fix all these cracks first in the image. Okay, so the very first thing I like to do, I'm going to duplicate it once again, Control J, and this one is where I'll just call this scratches. The reason I'm calling it scratches, just so you guys can see what I'm doing. I've selected it. Let's go to filter, noise, and dust, and scratches. It's going to bring up this little box here with different values in it. Let's just make sure they're all down to 0. And by moving certain parts of the thresholds and radius, you'll see, for example, here we go, a very minor adjustment. So what I'm looking at is this little preview window here. I've got preview checked by default. If I turn that off, you'll see the background image changes. But if you want to leave it on like I do, you can see that that's been used in order to see what I'm actually doing at the moment. So I can move it back a little bit, the radius. So I just want to make a minor adjustment. If you make too much of adjustment on something, you start to lose detail. So you got 1 there. I'll leave the threshold at 3. Radius up to 4 seems to remove all the scratches, funny enough. I'm happy with that. Let's select OK. And I'll do that, and I will zoom back out again. So there's our image without any of those little cracks in the image anymore, which is great. So we've done that. So we got before and after. Now, one thing you'll notice if I hide the top scratches layer, you'll see that it looks like it's lost a bit of detail. So I'm going to select the scratches. I'm going to go up to filter, and what I will do is come down to sharpen and select smart sharpen. And let's open up. Again, it has a nice little window for us, so we can preview it. And okay, so as I move it, you'll see it goes back to the original. When I release it, you'll see that it resharpens it up again. By default, it's saying that the amount's 159. For example, I could stretch it up a little bit higher. It might be a little bit too much. Maybe 155. I'm going to drop the radius down and then slowly move it up. Now, generally by default, it remembers the last, I guess, features or movements that you've made in it. So it's always a good practice to go, you know, when you first start, bring it back to 0 and slowly peak everything up. So what you're doing is you're slowly moving everything up and keeping an eye over here on the preview window. I might keep reduce noise down because we've already done that with the removal of the scratches and dust. So you can see the eye seems to sharpen up as I release it. I'm happy with that. So I'm using 234% of the amount with a radius of 3.5, and I've reduced the noise to 0. I'm going to select OK, and there we have it. It's a very subtle look, but if I hide it underneath, you'll see that it appears we now have an image that is still sharp. So it's brought back that sharpness and the detail again. We've moved the scratches from it. And as you can see underneath, those scratches are still there, but when we select it, they all disappear. So that's the basis we're going to use, especially when we start doing cloning. So we're going to have to do some cloning to bring back some of this image here. I'm not going to really focus on the background for this tutorial. That's another tutorial. I went as far as actually hiding it and changing the background. They just simply wanted to preserve Bill in the photo and weren't too concerned. So I actually used a different photo and just blurred it out a little bit. For me, it's just about repairing this photo. So we've brought the detail back. We've removed some of a lot of the cracking in the actual image itself. So let's do a little bit more color correction. So he's a little bit washed out now. He's looking very pink. So let's go back to image, adjustments, and color balance now. And I'm going to select highlights. Obviously the highlights is to do with the highlights of the colors. Then you've got your shadows, and then your midtones is obviously your face and so forth. So let's stick with midtones for now. Let's start to play around the colors. We'll start with the red first and start to bring it up just a little bit. And then I might start to play around with the greens. Then bring in the yellows. And same with the highlights. So again, this is, if you were following this tutorial with the same image, these would be the levels and so forth, probably to follow with, but chances are you're going to be using your own family photo. So you need to do what I'm doing, which is pretty much jump in there, open up that particular plugin, start moving it around until you get the look that you're after. And once you've got the look that you're after, move on to the next step. I'm happy with that. Let's select OK. So the next thing we're going to do is going to go up to image adjustments, and we're going to hit vibrance, and we're going to play with the vibrance now. So as I start to play around with vibrance and pump it up, you can see the colors starting to come back into the image. And I'm going to leave mine around about 61, so plus 61, and saturation. If you pump the saturation up too much, obviously, he's going to look like an Oompa Loompa, and we don't want Bill to look like an Oompa Loompa in the photo. So I just want to add a little bit extra color into it. And this is the look I'm going for, so plus 20 on saturation. I'm selecting OK. And then I'm going to go back to images, adjustments, and exposure now. I'm going to play around the exposure settings. And the offset. Okay. Now, one thing you probably notice, and I'll show you shortly as well, is we've also color corrected his hair and brought it back where Bill's original hair was orange, or red, I guess you could say, like a sandy red color. So it's just about trying to bring back some of the information that we know about the image. So I'm going to leave it like that. So I've gone into exposure. I've adjusted the exposure on it. I have dropped it down slightly, negative 0.10. It's not much. I've not touched the offset. As you can see, it's 0. If I move the offset around, you'll see it starts to wash it out. Or if I drop it down, it obviously crushes the blacks, and that's not what we want. So I'll just bring that back to 0. I'm selecting OK with that. So that's where we've got our photo at the moment. However, we need to get it to this stage. So one of the next things I will do is I'll move in. Now, if I hide this, you'll see the before and after. So we've started to bring the colors back into the image. One thing you'll notice though, Bill's eyes is no longer blue. They're more of a browny color with a bit of, or even green. So we need to change that. If we go all the way back to the original, which original is obviously locked in. So I'm using these two here. So what I want to do now in this image is I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to come up to the eraser tool. So the eraser tool here, which is E on the keyboard. I'm going to right click. I'm going to make sure that the soft rounded edges selected, because I want it to be a nice blur around the corners, something you won't see, but it blends the image in underneath it. So I'm going to cut the eyes out of Bill. Sorry, Bill. And what will happen is the image underneath it, because of the layers, will start to show up underneath. So if I start doing that, you'll see the blues coming back in. So all I'm doing is coming back in and deleting that. Now, one thing you'll probably notice is the pupil has now become washed out. So if I go back, so Control Z, and just go around where his eye is and not touch the pupil, it will then bring the blues back in. Now, one thing with images, they always say that the eyes are the windows to the soul, and that is very true. So, for example, you'll see on this image here, I really spent a bit of time with the detail of his eyes, because naturally humans are drawn into the eyes with conversation. So same with a photo. If you've got, and you'll see it, some people will say, wow, that's a stunning photo. And if you actually have a look, and they may have a beautiful subject or a pretty person, I guess you could say, in it. But if their eyes are really standing out, it's the same as when you watch a movie and you go, wow, that, you know, that especially the old movies when they did the color correction, a lot of the actors' eyes looked really blue. And it's not something you normally see in real life. But when you see it, you're like, whoa, you focus on that. So it's the same with an image. You really focus on the eyes, make them look healthy, make them look clean, and straight away people are drawn to that look of the image. Perfect. So I can hide those bits now. And as you can see, the blue's now standing out more on our image. So before I do any more color correction now, what I want to do is spend a little bit of time actually going in there and cleaning up all these damage in the photo. So, and then we'll go back and start making some more adjustments. I'm going to lock in the eye layer. So let's just call it the eye layer because that's his eyes, the blue coming through. I'll lock it so we don't touch it. Go back up to our scratches layer. And I'm going to press S or come over here to the Photoshop CC. It sort of gives you a little demonstration of what it is, which is really good. But that's the clone stamp tool. So pressing S on your keyboard to bring up the stamp tool. And what you need to do, or how it works, is you hold the Alt button down and you'll see a little crosshair comes up. And what it's doing is looking for a target. So wherever you select on the left button of your mouse key, virtually of where you're wanting to select, it will copy that part onto the next part. So right click, make sure that you've got the soft round edge on, and that helps it to blend in, obviously into the image. So I'm going to press the Alt button down. I'm going to select this part just above and come down, and I'm just going to paint over. So just a few strokes, and as you can see, that bit of damage is now fixed. And I can do the same here and here as well. Another thing you'll notice if I zoom out, it's always a good idea to zoom out. You'll see that there's a little bit of it looks like a scaling effect, and that's because I didn't choose any other part of the image when I was fixing it. I just kept on, I selected once and I moved down. Now that's one thing you need to be mindful of. I call it scaling. It could be, not even sure what the technical term for it is. Let's go back and let's do it again. S, select that area up here, and I'll move this part. Now I will come to here, holding the Alt button down, select this part of the cheek, do this part just in front of the wrinkle. Then I might select the wrinkle here, just the center part of it, and then the out part, like so. And when I do that, and I'll select this part here and move it over here. The reason I try and select as close as possible to where the damage is to correct it, as you can see, the scaling's now gone. It looks more natural. The reason I do that, I get as close as I can because there's different pigmentation in the skin, and that can cause an issue. For example, if I use his nose over here and start painting over here, you'll notice that I'm now starting to put a darker patch from here onto his cheek, and that does not, obviously it stands out. So, well, it does stand out, and because it stands out, it's not something that we want. So again, we'll press S to bring up the clone stamp tool. Use the Alt button to select here. I'm going to use the crease here. And I might just remove some of the damage there. I can remove some of the skin tones as well. He's got a few little blotches, as you do when you're out in the sun all the time as a farmer. So we're just going to pretty him up, but we won't tell him because Bill does not, he's a man's man. He's an old style. So, but, we'll just make it look nice and pretty. So, okay, so we've done that part. Now there's a lot here missing, and I could bring some of this part up here down, or this part here over, or let me show you a little trick. So I'm going to use the lasso tool, the polygon lasso tool here, this one here, and I'm going to come down his face and over his eyebrow. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this part of the image, and I'll double click so it makes a marquee around it. Control C to copy, or come up to edit C, and then Control P or paste to bring it back down. So now we've got this part floating around. So I'm going to hold Control down and select T, which is a shortcut to allow me to drag the image over and flip it, as you can see. So I've just flipped his forehead over. I can move it into place. I'm going to have a look to where his wrinkles are and hit enter when I'm happy where it is. So what I've done now is I sort of just made pretty much just a clone, similar to what the cloning tool does, but of a larger portion, and flipped it over. And we're going to come up and select our eraser tool now, or E on the keyboard will bring up our eraser tool. Right click, make sure that the round soft edge is selected. And I'm going to use the open close brackets in order to open and close with the keyboard the size of where the actual eraser is. And I'm going to go around the edges now just to feather it in. As you can see, let's feather it in like so. And the idea is so that it blends into where his forehead is. And that is now done. So where it is, so I'm going to press Z on the keyboard so I can zoom in and zoom out. And if I come back up to this patch here on the layer, I can now hide and bring it back. So that's where it is. I can even go in there and do a little bit more deleting just around here. Oh, too far. Like so. Some of it, obviously, you can see it's highlighted. It looks darker here. So there's a little trick to that. What we're going to do is come up to this tool here, which is our burn tool. It's located here. If you hold it, the left button down on your mouse, there's 3 tools hidden under that. And the burn tool, I'll just show you what it does. I'm just going to select it once over the image, and you can see it just adds a little bit of a darkening to it. It burns the image. So if I hold it down, for example, you can see it burns the image and makes it look like a burn or a bruise even. Funny enough, I've used this type of tool to try and, or to successfully make it look like you've got a black eye by putting it under the eye, and you burn underneath the eye on the image, and it allows that to look like someone's punched you in the eye and you've got a bruise there. So now, one thing you'll notice as well, before we go any further, before we join these 2 elements together, you'll see that he's got it looks like a sunspot here and here. So let's remove that. I'm just going to select the clone tool and just paint over that. Like so. I can remove some of his wrinkle here, because obviously a wrinkle's not going to go all the way across. It may in some situations or for some people, but for Bill, we won't do that. And now I'm going to bring the scratches and the layer 1 together. So all you need to do is select scratches, select layer 1. So I held the shift button down and selected both of those. Now there's 2 options here. I can hold the control down and select E, and it will bring it both together. That's a shortcut. Or I can go up to layer, and what I want to do is merge layers. And it also tells you control E is that shortcut that I was talking about. So let's select that. You'll see both of those layers joined together. Now it's called layer 1. The reason it's called layer 1, whatever you call the layer above it, it will then call it that. We're going to be working with layer 1 now. So it used to be scratches, it's now layer 1, but you'll notice that now those 2 images are 1, which is good because now we can work on those together. So let's select the S for the clone tool, and now I'm going to do some painting. Now, a lot of repair work on photos obviously is a form of artwork when you think about it, because you do a lot of painting and creative I guess, guesswork, especially when it comes to repairing of photos. Black and white photos, color photos are harder to do because you're looking and working with tones of color and so forth. So if you're interested in getting into this type of stuff as a hobby and wanting to learn, I suggest get hold of an old black and white photo. And trust me, there is a lot of them around. There was a few, have to be at least 40, 50 years worth of black and white photos floating around. So chances are your grandparents or maybe your whoever's in your family that does the family tree stuff has some photos, and chances are a lot of them will be damaged, and chances are they will be most grateful. And if not, if you're wanting to correct your own ones, at least you'll have some of your own black and white photos corrected by yourself, and it's a good learning curve. I've got some that I've done for some people at work. One of them, I love history. That's something that I'm into, so I spend a lot of time obviously on the line looking at the internet at history, World War I, World War II and so forth, especially Australia, Anzacs and so forth. And one of the people at work, I won't say their name, but they provided me a photo of their great-grandfather. He was in a hospital in France during World War I, and a lot of the image was actually ruined. It was missing. And what I did was I was able to do a little bit of research on what it looked like in the hospital area that they were located at. And a lot of it was actually going in there and painting some of the original rafters and copying and pasting like I did Bill's forehead. And as you can see, I've now fixed Bill's forehead here, and that large chunk, which if I hide this here, this whole chunk here, including up here, using the clone tool and just copying and pasting, has allowed me to now correct that whole forehead. So we're just going to do his eyebrow now, or close enough. Good thing with Bill in this photo is his eyebrows are very, blondish, and because of that reason, they don't stand out as much. So it's easier for me just to go in there and cover over. If there was an issue with an eyebrow being missing, again, if you've got an eyebrow on the other side, I have done repairs with images as well where some of the photo around the eye is missing, and it's just a matter of going into the eye and duplicating it, moving it over and adjusting it into perspective. And you can generally pull off a really good look to that, and that might be another tutorial I can cover later on for everyone if they are interested. So there we go. Bill's forehead is now done. Let's move on to his cheek. So I'm going to use the S. I'm going to select this part here. You can see the background and foreground. Foreground being his cheek, background obviously being the background. I'm going to use his cheek here to come down and move that over. You can see a slight crease as well. Now, another reason why I and everyone should when they're scanning, because these are obviously old images and most of them will need to be scanned into a computer. I use a scanner on my computer. I've got a scanner printer, Canon Pixamar, I think the brand is. It's very good. I like it. I can save it straight to USB, the scans, and then plug it straight into my PC. So I'm happy with that. Some people, you can get different scanners, which will plug straight into your computer. You scan it and it appears on your computer, which is great. When you're scanning though, 600 DPI would be the minimum I would say to scan it at. And like I was saying before, if I hit Z on my keyboard, which will bring up the little magnifying glass again is located over here in the tools palette. If I hit 100%, you'll see that is what 100% pixels is looking at. And you can see it's quite close and it's blurry in some parts, but when you zoom out, that's probably the size of the image that you would have printed off. You can see the details there. And I do that as well because I want to get in there really close and see what the damage is, like those cracks before, these here. They don't really show up, I guess, when you print them, but if you clean them up and then print the picture, you will see the difference in what it does. So, and one thing I just noticed then is there's a bit of bit of cloth or something there. So we might remove that as well while we're in it. Okay. Perfect. So that's that part done. Let's now move on to his chin, and then we'll move on to a more complex area, which is a cheek that has two creases. You can see the creases don't join together. If I join it together, it'll look like he has something growing up the side of his face, and it's not. It's a laugh line. So we need to correct that, but we'll do all this little bits of work first, and then we'll get into the finalizing of this. So I'm just going to select here. Again, I'm moving close to where the damage is. Don't always have to grab it from the top or grab it just from the bottom. It's a good idea to move around. And because you're moving around, it looks more natural. Otherwise, you'll get, like I was saying before, that scaling look where you've just copied it once and then you just keep moving it down. And what happens, it's sort of like feathers. It's almost like a smudge all the way down someone's face. Okay, so let's do Bill's neck now. So I'm moving around the damage, as you can see here. You can see the feather. If I move real close in, you can see there's a feather around there. And the feather is what's allowing us to blend this image in so that when we get a finished result, you shouldn't be able to tell. And that's the whole idea with the image repairs, obviously, is making sure that you cannot tell what's been done. Okay, perfect. Right, so there's all these other bits and pieces, as you can see, of his shirt. It's going to need a lot of attention, and there was a lot of attention to clean that up. The way I got it cleaned up is I went in there and I did the same thing as I've done to all this other damage, is clone the colors over the dark. You can see there's a dark color there, which is the original color, which is down the bottom. So I kept that. but use the white part to go through and clean up the shirt. We'll clean up his face now though. So again, I'm going to select the cloning tool and I'm going to make just a few small passes and then select another location and keeping the colors consistent. So that's something that you really need to work on when working with these images. And selecting the crease, as you can see, I've selected down here and moving up to move the crease up, and then I'll move away from that crease line. What I'll do, it needs to move into roughly around there, and then there's another little crease that ends around here. You can see this one on the other side of his face. And that's obviously because Bill likes a good laugh. You know, he likes to smile, and like they say, they're laugh lines. And it shows a life lived with a good smile on your face. So let's blend them in. Well, see the color change? I selected an area that was too dark, like that. And now it makes it look more like a sunspot in there. So I can go back in there, and that's too light. So we're starting to get to an area where it's going to be a little bit fiddly. So I'm going to keep going in there and coloring it. Now there's a few little, looks like round spots that I've put in there because I've selected in the dark area. We need to bring in more of this part here in his cheek. There we go. Okay, now let's work on from here. So again, some of this is just creative work where we're selecting parts of the image and moving them around. And here. Now there is another tool that you can use. You got the spot healer or the healing brush tool. I'll select the healing brush tool. I'm going to right select on that. I'm going to move the hardness to say 50%, so it feathers it out. And how it works is you can do the same as a cloning. You can select part of it. So this is the area I want Photoshop to recognize. Now with this is I'll paint down and see how it paints over, and it cheats. And it also adjusts the gradient for us automatically. And that's because of the AI that's in Photoshop and the algorithms, as they call it. So Photoshop is almost AI, as much AI as other bits and pieces are going. So it tries to become as creative by using parts of the color that's in that area and pretty much doing what we were doing manually. So that is one way to go through and sort of cheat. But as you can see, Photoshop doesn't do 100% a good job because now we've got a white mark. Now we could go up to the burn tool and hope that the burn tool by hitting it once cleans it up, but it won't. So let's zoom back in and I'm going to do some more cloning and bring just some of this color down. I can make the size of my clone a little bit larger, and I'm going to drop the opacity down to 28% up here. So what happens, you watch what happens as I paint it over. It will slowly, and it takes a while, but each stroke slowly changes the image like so, and allows me to hide that part of his cheek. And there's a part here I need to work on. I just want to change it and lighten it. And there we go. So I've just corrected that part of his face. There's one little part here. I'll just I'll show you this dot here, and this dot here. Those two look the same. That's another thing when you do the cloning. Always make sure, I'm going to just pump it back up to 100%. Always make sure that you don't have replications of the same mole or skin, for example, skin spot, sunspot, because what happens is if you have the same type of spots around and it really stands out that something's been done. And the whole idea about this is to make it appear that the image hasn't been corrected. So let's have a look at the before and the after. So as you can see, this image has already come a long way from the beginning, including his hair is coming back to normal color, and we've corrected his face damage. Let's work a little bit on his shirt now. So this is all about coming through and changing those blues. Now, the reason I'm not going to go in there and change his shirt that color blue straight off, the whole reason behind it is because there's more white there. So I'm going to copy all the white over the blue as patches, fix them up, and then I'll go in there and change the color of his t-shirt. Now, there's a tool in Photoshop that you can use to change a t-shirt as color or any color on the image. That's a tool that's located under image adjustments, and it's called replace color. You select it and then you change the color of it. So I'm just going to correct the image of his shirt just so you can see what I do to do it. Now, an image like this is tutorials. It's rushed in some ways. I'm trying to show you within a short period of time how to do something. I would spend a lot longer just spending the time to correct stuff. And sometimes a lot of it is going back in there and making a finer adjustment to a color correction and then coming back out, doing more work on something and then coming back again and going, you know what, that color's wrong. I know this color's wrong. The end product I want is to look like this, which is more natural. To get to that, I need to fix all the damage first. I've done the basics of his color correction and removed the red, so I can now move around, do the repair work, and then I'll go in there and do the final touches where I start to, for example, decide, is the background going to be needed? Am I going to cut that background out and put a different background in for the time being? Are they happy with just the image to be corrected and doesn't matter about the grain in it? For example, this is a lot of grain. And that's obviously because the image over time is depleted. However, in these situations, probably about talking with your client. A lot of the time, the client may not want this. They don't want the background to be removed. They want everything to be left natural. Just fix it up as best you can. And they will be happy with something like this that's corrected, leaving this original background. The client for this one just wanted that background removed. They just wanted to have focus on Bill so that they could obviously have the repaired photo. But at the same time, another thing I like to do as well is I like to do a digital copy of the original, as I've done with this one. And I give them original, the before and the after. So obviously they get the original back, but they also get a copy of their original and they also get a copy of the repair. Now I do that for a few reasons. One, because I've got a backup then of the original. I also, give them a digital copy because that way it's digital. If you don't lose it, it's always going to be there. And another thing is, funny enough, a lot of clients, when they get work like this, they actually like to do a bit of show and tell. So when they get it, it's almost like, oh, look, I've got something now. It's a talking point. This photo was put back into the lounge room of the client and next to his wife. And it's actually a bit of a talking point. He likes to point out what it looks like beforehand. And this is what it looks like now. And look how amazing technology has come, this far around down the track. And again, like I was saying before, in some situations, things like this, you'll find some people look at this image and say, well, that's not salvageable. But, depending on what you want to salvage, I would say that you definitely can salvage it. So, and look, if it's the only photo that you've got of somebody, maybe that's another reason you want to salvage it. So at the moment, I'm currently using the healing brush tool just to speed up my workflow. Again, I'm allowing Photoshop to make the judgment call for me to what needs to be replaced and from where. And I think that's doing a fairly good job at the moment, just to speed up the process until we get into the finer parts of cleaning up this image. And you can probably use some of the shirt stuff as well. So let's see what Photoshop does with the shirt. Let's select that area over here and let's see if it does anything. It's not too bad. It is trying to match that blue in there. The AI in it is really pushing hard to correct it based on the fact that the area still has that blue color in there. So the cloning tool in this situation would be the best bet. I'm going to drop the opacity down. If you're not comfortable using the cloning tool like I am, again, come up to opacity, drop opacity down. Instead of being 100%, drop it down to even 20% if you want to do some finer work. So if I drop it down to 20, or you can just write 20 in there. You can come right in there and keep painting, and it will slowly, if it's 20%, it means it's going to take 5 strokes to make 100% over it. So it means I can do 1, 2, 3, it's starting to disappear, 4, there we go. Okay, 5. So again, I can keep painting over it and then go, okay, I'll stop there. That may have been 3 strokes of the brush, but I'm more happy with that. So that's another way, and that's a longer process. And you can see the wall moving. And this one here, for example, takes a lot longer, but sometimes it's like, oh, that's perfect. I'll leave that. But that does 20% of it, or you can do what I'm doing to speed up the process and just hit 100% and go straight over the stroke. So let's have a look before and after. So we fixed all up here. There's a few patches I'm not 100% happy with, but again, we're not going to really be focusing on that. So let's pretend we've fixed all the shirt up. The shirt is now all patched up in the corners. And we're going to work on his face now. Now, what I like to do is I like to hit the selection tool. And I'll just make that smaller. I'm going to come in here, and what I'm going to do is select his face and his ears. And I hold the Alt button down to deselect parts of it. So I don't want to select his hair as such. And this is one way to color correct. So it's automatically not selecting the eyes because we deleted that part, if you remember. So I've got that selected. And now what I want to do, I'm going to right select on that. I'm going to come in and I'm going to select and mask. So let's select and mask, and they'll bring up the parts that we've actually selected. You've got the opacity over here, so you can adjust the opacity, hard or soft. We're going to bring it down to say 50%. Let's select the radius and make the adjustment on that. So I'm going to go 54, smooth it out. So I'm smoothing out the edges. And you're probably wondering what I'm doing. Let's go feather. I'm adjusting the feather. So what I'm trying to do is I'm going to cut Bill's face out virtually and just color correct that. So once I've done that, select OK. And if I hit Control C to copy, Control V to paste it, and I hide everything else, you can see that's Bill's face cut out. And we're just going to call that Bill's face. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to not hide anything. So I'm just going to select Bill's face layer, which is the layer that we'll cut out. And again, you may not need to do this. Okay, so you may not need to go as far as cutting out the subject's face in order to do some extra color correction. But why I'm doing that is because I just want to focus on his skin tones. And I'm going to make some adjustments to his skin tones and then make it change the adjustment layer underneath it. And I'll show you how I do that. So I'm going to go Image, Adjustments, and let's go to Color Balance. And we're going to make some finer adjustments to his skin tone. So I'm dropping the red down to -54 on the midtones. And I'm going to bump up to the green +20. And -8 on the yellow. And let's have a look at the yellow. And I'm going to drop down the highlights of the yellow to more into the blue, +11. And I'll leave the magenta and green. And I'm going to bump it up to +10 in the red. Select OK. So if I remove his face like so, you can see the color changes. So that's before, that's after. You can also see his face has dropped a little bit. So I'm going to move that up just once. Let's have a look. Now how I did that is I just simply selected that layer and used the up and down. As you can see on my keyboard, I can actually move his face around with the eyes still staying intact. Okay, so we've done that. So I can come down to fill now and I can adjust the fill. And so I'm going to select it at 50%. And I'm going to select those two, Control E to bring them together, or again, you go up to Layer and merge down. Or merge visible. Merge down is if I want to get the top one to the bottom one, hit the top layer, Control E will drop it straight down to the next one, as you can see. So that's now on top of the eyes. So let's have a look. We've got before, after, and the colors. So a lot of this work now, to make Bill pop out a little bit more, we could play around with, let's say, hit the curves. And I've got RGB selected, and I can crush the blacks down like so. I can let's peak it up a little bit. Bring the whites in to make it stand out just a little bit more. And see, a lot of this is really just playing around with the image now to try and get that whole color that you're after. I drop the tones down for him to make it more natural. So we need to really do that. So let's do that. We can select auto tone, but that's going to take some of the color away from us. Again, you can hit auto color, and as you can see, it starts to change the colors to something that's not really what we're after. But what we want to do is let's go to adjustments, and we need to start to hit the desaturation on it. So what we want to do is go to hue and saturation. And we're going to bump the saturation down a little bit. As you can see, it's bringing back that natural color that we're after. And that's because the saturation's been dropped out of it. You can change the colors, obviously, of Bill if you want to, but we're not going to do that. We're just going to play around with that. You can also play around with lightness on your image if you're wanting to play around with it a little bit, depending on what you're doing. But again, in this situation, we won't. So all we're worried about is the saturation, because we're going from, where is it? Let's go back to 0, because 0 is the default. So that's the original color, and dropping it down brings it back more to a natural look. So we've got that light sunburnt that he's got on his nose, his lips, but his eyes and those and so forth are coming out nicely. So I'm going to leave it as -27, select OK. And this is what we have to this. So that's what we've got. For me to get to that stage, obviously, here, the reason he looks so good here on this one is because the background's cut out. If we cut him out in the background here, he would stand out as well. Another thing we can do is come down to his eyes. So I'm going to go back to the eyes layer. And let's just hide the top one, the top layer. I'm going to come in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the cloning tool. Let's go in. And we're going to do some cloning just to hide the cracks on his eyes. And we can use the spot tool to fix it, but I like doing it manually sometimes. Okay, so what I want to do, let's go and select the selection tool up here, which is called the quick selection tool. I'm going to drop the size of it to the pupil size, and it's selected it, and come over here and select his other pupil. And as you can see, those two pupils are now selected on the eye layer. And I'm going to go up to image, adjustments, and brightness and contrast. I want to come into the brightness and make it darker. So -28, I'm happy with. Let's right click and deselect that. Now what I want to do is select his eye and over here. So both those eyes are selected. Let's go to image. Let's go to adjustments and color balance. And let's play around his eye color. So let's bring up the cyan a little bit. And let's bring in the blue like so. And I've just added that in the midtones, so +39 on the blue, -36 on the cyan. Let's select OK, and let's deselect. So I just right-clicked and deselected the marquee. And I'm going to bring back the top layer, which is Bill's face again. As you see, his eyes are standing out. So there we go. That is an image. You can spend more time. This is obviously a first tutorial, I guess you could say, because I'll make a few other ones showing how to correct images. That is the face corrected. That is our color correction done. So we've gone from an image that looks like... So we've gone from an image that looks like this to an image that looks like this. Now, again, the background does need a lot of work to fix up the shadows. Now, another thing we can do as well as crop the image to remove that, and I would have done that with the other one once I've done the color correction on his t-shirt. But again, that's a part for another tutorial. So that's how we've done the correction of it. I've also gone in there, done the color correction to bring back the image from that, which is something that someone would have thought was unsalvageable, to an image that looks more like this with all the parts corrected, his eyes corrected as well. If you're not happy with that color, again, you change the color to whichever way that you see fit the eyes are brown, then it's probably a lot easier. Obviously, the next step, if you wanted to do, is on your own, you can go in there and cut him out, or your own image out and change the background, or you can go in there and spend some time by just capturing the outside, like I showed you how to remove his face, and go in there and just select the background and actually work just on the background, depending on how much time, money, or whatever you want to spend on these type of things. So I'll show you a few other images that I've done some color correcting on. Again, like I was saying before, black and white is definitely something to look at and something as a starting point. But this is how you remove red out of an old color photo and correct it and start to bring it back so it looks closer to this. This tutorial has gone for too long, so if you want to become a Filmmaster subby, it's pretty simple. Subscribe to the channel, like us on Facebook and or on Twitter. Till next time, don't just film it, master it.